the narrative for them, and that is very, very sad because, look, I think that, you know, of course, India is different.
Hey guys, it's Loud Guys. Today we are going to watch why so many people get India wrong by an American's point of view. So there have been some racist comments that I have seen, but I think so mostly Americans, like in my comments also, are very, very helpful and very like genuine people.
They are very genuine.
They say that okay, we look up to you guys, and like not look up to it, is basically like we want you to come to America and we want to host you. And also many people would like they say that we also want to come to India. So there's a very good relation, but like I think so there are many people that get India very, very wrong.
I think they have some, you know, some typical like stereotypes in their mind, like, you know, the cow thing, and there are a lot of things like American really think that if you imagine, you know, if you tell any American, like not mostly Americans, you would anybody imagine India. So they mostly imagine India as like very crowded people, and people are dirty, and like there's no place they eat, you know, whatever they find, and all such things. So it's not.
Yeah, actually, and also the thing is like we have seen in Family Guy also, like how they show and everything. So do the people also think the same and what it is? So let's watch the
video.
Some of the comments I've read, I've been to India, it's the dirtiest place I've ever been, and I never go back. Are you kidding? Like, I mean, most Indians keep their homes immaculately and beautifully.
Meet Jeff Goldberg, an American film director who's been living in India for almost 15 years, where he runs his own acting studio. Jeff shares common prejudices about India in America, how to understand India if you're not from there, and whether the caste system affects foreigners who live in India. I'm Aksar, your insider to expat life. Chalo!
So especially for Americans, especially Americans my age or my generation, easily the worst thing to ever happen was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Why?
You know, because that film is so incredibly prejudiced and just straight up, to use modern nomenclature, unwoke. You know, I've always wanted to say to Steven Spielberg, so Steven, if you're listening, I want to ask you a question, which is, why would you take easily one of the greatest cuisines in the world, Indian food, and make a mockery of it in that scene when they're eating dinner at the Maharaja's palace?
I need to see this movie now.
I've never understood that, because it's like there are so many things that India is known for, but certainly one of them that it's globally recognized for is how absolutely delicious and stunningly good and diverse Indian food is. And suddenly to have this Maharaja scene, which is totally like just stereotyped and upside down, is really, really, really strange. And even people say, oh, you know, but Jeff, they're in the Temple of Doom Palace, so of course they'd eat the snake surprise and eyeball soup. But it's like, wait, even in the village, you have them eating like bugs in the food and stuff. And I can tell you one thing, and I mean this with all the respect it deserves, is no matter where you eat in India, you will eat clean, good food. People take that very, very seriously. Even people at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, you know, you eat really nice stuff. It might be simple, but it will definitely be yummy. So I've always wondered why he did that. Anyway, so sometimes you have to debunk rumors and ideas like that. Americans are it's a very insular country, as much as it doesn't think it is, as much as it thinks it's a global player, and it is a global player.
And also, like, I have seen a lot of hygiene related videos about India and Indian street food. But you know, when we see that, okay, there are also many like there are Gorden Ramzi that you might know. So when you see his videos, so he has gone to like biggest American restaurants or UK restaurants, and we see that when he goes behind those closed doors, you see the mess there also. Like it is on the person, not on the whole community. It is on the person.
Simply blame.
Yeah, and I've seen in American restaurants kitchen they have like mice, they have pigeons, they have this and that. So it is just because we cannot see what the hotel is making, so we expect it to be more hygienic.
You know, also it's about the image that has been in the world, because India is still a developing country. Once the tag is coming like this is developed, nobody doubts, and they think that everything is perfect in that country. But when you are a developing country, when you are, you know, running towards a success and you're improving your country, people might think, oh, they are still like shit.
Actually,
on the world stage in terms of its foreign affairs and of course its military, but the average American isn't the most worldly person, for better or worse, and that's not a criticism, it's just seems to be a fact. And when they come outside of that bubble, the expectations that they come with are often things they learned on television or in the media that probably are either A, old news, antiquated, or maybe just straight up wrong. You have to sort of debunk some of that stuff along the way, you know. Like for instance, some of the comments I've read in yours and my chats is, you know, I've been to India. It's the dirtiest place I've ever been, and I'd never go back. You know, look, I mean, I can't sit here and say that India doesn't have some sanitary
Yes, we have
issues,
issues.
but at the same time, like, are you kidding? Like, I mean, most Indians keep their homes immaculately and beautifully, and the vast majority of people have folks come in and clean each day for them. So
Actually.
to sit there and say it's a dirty place is a false narrative, and when you label it like that and you make that general sort of statement, you diminish a truth, and that's unfortunate. And then you propagate that truth and you allow that truth to become fact. And
Actually, then
unfortunately,
everybody
that
believes
might
that.
actually dissuade people from wanting to come here and see what it's like. And I would never, ever, ever do that. I think that's a terrible thing to do to any country or culture. Well, I think you got to get on the ground and see it for yourself and make your own judgments.
Why do you think there are so many like misconceptions that I personally see like in the media, in YouTube comments, some different type of stereotypes about India like spreading around?
I'll be honest. There's a wonderful book by a French doctor from the 1950s, 40s, 50s, and 60s named Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon was a doctor born in the French West Indies in Martinique, and he wrote a book about his experiences when he moved to the metropolitan part of France, which is European France, and then his experiences as a medical doctor and psychiatrist during the Algerian War in northern Africa. And the book, The Wretched of the Earth, is about the colonial mindset and the experience of the colonized through a psychological lens, and speaking about how they feel, the violence, the degradation, the racism, the bigotry they dealt with, and how that has manifested itself in the Algerian context into the FLN, which was fighting the French to get them out of Algeria, and the violence that incurred. It's a wonderful book, and I think it's a very important book for people to read today because, you know, when you look around at the situation in the world, you can still find a lot of truisms or paradigms that would be important to recognize. That said,
About narrative.
coming over to India, look, there are thinkers on the left and the right political side of the spectrum here, from the current foreign minister, Jay Shankar, to the Congress politician, Shashi Tharoor, who talk about the colonial experience in India. And there really is no way to understand modern India without at least having a recognition of the colonial lens. And so much of the pedestrian view of India is without a doubt mixed up in that colonial view. And sadly, unfortunately, and pathetically, even this many years since the end of British rule, a lot of it is just racist.
Yeah.
It is, I'm sorry. And I know that that's going to be something that's going to light off a lot of comments from people because, of course, I'm not calling anyone a racist. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that prejudicial thinking is the result of not knowing and coming to
Why
a
would you
conclusion
think like
about
that?
something without having the full picture, or at least enough information to make a wise, informed, at the very least educated guess. And I think that the reason people have so many prejudicial views towards India is because they allow the media, films, hearsay, or just borrowed cheap ideas to become the narrative for them. And that is very, very sad because, look, I think
They
that,
take
you know,
one
of
thing
course,
and show
India
it
is different.
to
I don't think
everyone.
any Indian on earth would ever dispute that. But that doesn't mean that it is a place that is any less incredible or full of wonder. Surely it has its problems. And again, I don't think any Indian would ever not admit to the problems that the country has.
yeah,
But to be completely one-sided, which is often the case with non-Indian views vis-a-vis the country, it's sad. And it's just straight up lame that in the 21st century, where we have access to so much information and we have greater ability to travel, that people don't debunk those unfortunately prejudicial views. So I think that's one of the reasons.
This YouTuber guy, Bold and Bankrupt, very large travel YouTuber, recently went to India, and most of the time he's positive about the countries. But for India, he was like quite negative, and that was a lot of backlash. But I think the problem is if you just walk in the streets and you have this pedestrian view, not understanding the complexity of things, not the history, then it's kind of easy to start judging. And like saying like, oh, why, what's going on? Why it's working this way? So any advice for, let's say for foreigners, how to
Just be
understand
patient.
that complex country as India?
Anywhere you go in the world, you have to be a sponge. You have to be willing to soak in what's there without judgment, you know. And I think the one thing that we all spend so much time forgetting, we don't even spend any time forgetting because we just forget it straight up, which is empathy, right? Like, what is
Yeah.
empathy? I think that, you know, that is one thing and one characteristic or one quality or one emotion that the world can use a lot more of right now is empathy. No one's asking you to like everything. No one's asking you to enjoy everything. No one's asking you to even understand everything, but at least take out the time to recognize that someone else's journey isn't yours.
Yeah,
and that
different
person got
person.
there through a series of events and circumstances and experiences that belong to them. And those moments are their life, and they're as important to them as yours is to you. But we are so quick to judge. We are so quick to paint people with a brush that is very black or white. It's very monochrome. And the world is not
I've not seen his video, that Ball and Bankrupt video, but what I think is like the one clip that was seen, like how there was that one guy who was waving in the camera, and then he put, I think so, his hand on his shoulder, and he was like looking like that. So you have that kind of prejudice, I think so, because with Indians it is like that. They are very happy and like very like getting involved, and there is something called like that, the circle of privacy kind of thing. In India that is not that case, because people invade that and people like to be your friends.
Definitely, we are like very kind of friendly and welcoming people, I would say, because they might think that. And also, if that guy has that thing, oh, he is Indian and don't touch me and sort of thing, then that is offensive. Of course, if he has something like he doesn't like to, privacy thing is different. But when you think someone as, oh, he's Indian, or maybe the racism or whatever he might be thinking, that is so wrong.
Actually,
monochrome. I mean, I know that here I am sitting behind all these black and white photos here at my studio of my actors, but life is gray. Life is gray, and I think that the more we embrace that incredible infinite number of shades of gray, the more empathetic we become. That's just my very, very, very humble view. And again, I'm sure the comments will light up with 1,000 thoughts on that. But ultimately, I think that if you're coming to India, you're coming to an ancient place that has existed as long as history itself, but also exists in its own right. And much like your own society, it's unapologetic about what it is, and it doesn't have to apologize or make a allowance for you. You need to recognize that you're here, and you need to be a little patient with that, and it's going to challenge you. But isn't that why you're coming? Isn't that why you travel?
yes.
Isn't why you do
Learn to
anything
see
to
something
learn?
new.
If you're doing something just because it fits into your everyday and it feels comfortable,
Right.
then, and that's fine. That's okay. If that's who you are, if you want to live that life, if you're happy with your everyday, then don't challenge yourself. But if you do choose to challenge yourself, be open-minded to it. India can be a dangerous, wild place, and you got to be careful, and you got to be a little bit sensitive to your whereabouts, have some street smarts, of course, especially if you're a young woman traveling on your own or a group of young
Yes.
women. You need to be safe. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's all music and candy canes, because it isn't, okay? But I'm from New York City. I mean, I wouldn't tell you to walk around certain parts of New York City in any hour of the
Oh,
day.
really?
You got to be smart, right? I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't go to certain neighborhoods at a certain time of the day,
That did not
not
look
because I
like
didn't
New
feel
York.
like I wouldn't be welcomed, but because it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe, and that was a truth. And I mean, if you know something's not safe, you got to be a little smart about that, right? You can't expect the will of the world to change to your demands. That's naive.
If you spend like 10 plus years in US or in Europe, in most of the cases you become a citizen of the place,
Yeah.
of the particular country. Like, how would you call yourself? You are like expat or immigrant or foreigner, or you're like pretty localized? How would you define yourself?
Expat, as far as I know, is somebody who's sent here by a company, and the company is, picking up the tab on everything from the school for the kid to the house to the car, that kind of thing. Immigrant, of course, is someone who comes and sets up a life, and I'm not really sure what's in between that, but I'm sure there are many. If you're being strict about definitions, I fall under the immigrant category. I came here on my own, of my own volition, of my own will, set up a business, set up a life. The company that I run is an Indian company. Yes, of course, it now keeps me here, but it didn't send me here. Everything is kind of on my own. And it's interesting, so that word immigrant has a lot of connotation attached to it today, especially in certain parts of the world. And, I live as an immigrant, and I can really empathize with the struggles that immigrants have. Now, of course, I'm someone who has a university education, and I definitely come from what would be considered a middle class, even privileged background, and I fully recognize that. My journey cannot be compared to that of someone who comes from a much lesser means, and I understand their struggle is infinitely more challenging than mine. But, in terms of like not having any family here, in terms of not having anybody like to call who hook me up with like,
After
you know,
10
some
years?
like information really easily, or I don't know, have a cousin or a cousin who works in a certain administration to get something done. I don't have any of that. I've done it all on my own. And that's been an interesting ride because, you know, I've had the opportunity to see
Amazing.
the
That's
Indian
very
Administrative Services up close and personal. And, you know, it works. And I know that, you know, we always get lots of comments in our chats, you know, and they're always very, very heartwarming. So a big shout out to everybody who makes the comments. Thank you. You know, but people always think that I'm just being nice. But actually, I got to tell you, the Indian Administrative Services, you know, I've dealt with the FRROO office, which is the Foreign Registration Office, a few times. It's been pretty straightforward. It's been pretty easy stuff. As long as you show up with the papers you need to have, the signatures you need to have, you're pretty well sorted out. Actually, people are going to kind of roll their eyes at this, but the most difficult and challenging immigration situation I ever went through was in the U.S. That was really hard because, you know, my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time with my son, we had to deal with some paperwork stuff, and that was really challenging. They made that hard on us, and they made us, and they did something that I never experienced in France, because I lived there, as you know, for a long time. I never experienced here in India. In the U.S., they made me feel like a foreigner. They made us feel like, you know, we were asking for something special, like, you know, the right to be in America. And I kind of wanted to, like,
In
remind
India,
the guys a
we
few
like
times, like,
foreigners.
fellas, like, everybody in
might
this
get
country is
your
kind of
work
from
done faster.
somewhere, you know, like, we all have a story. So maybe, like, a little, like, take the attitude off a little bit. But there was a real kind of, like, we're America. And I was just like, okay, if that's how you feel about it. You know, and you know, of course, you find yourself like apologizing to people because you're American. You're like, I'm so sorry. There was a little chauvinism in it that was surprising to me, where in other places I haven't experienced that.
What do you feel when you are on the US soil and then when you go back to India? How do you feel?
There were things that's funny, you know, because like actually it's very, very beautiful and incredibly gracious. But Indians, you know, because I've lived here for so long now, sometimes they'll like sort of passively just be like, oh, Jeff, you're one of us now, right?
Yeah, we
and
do
I
that.
never really get that until actually I'm out of India and I realize how accustomed to living in India I am, how accustomed to the food and the flavors, the people, the spaces and places, the way life moves. You know, you realize how accustomed and how conditioned you become to a place when you're out of it. So,
You just
you know, and
become a
actually I
part
do
of
feel
all
that
this.
when I'm in the US. I feel like, wow, I really haven't lived here in a long time and I don't really get everything about how it's done or, you know, for instance, like one thing that I'm terrible at is Americans are pretty good at being on time. You know, if they tell you 1 o'clock, they probably mean 1 o'clock.
In India,
Where,
no.
you know, I'm, you know, 1:15, 1:20, you know, but I've learned the trick with Americans is that if you message them when you're on your way, even if you're running late, you say, I'm on my way, they know you're coming. So they don't start to have some sort of like, you know, panic attack that you're not coming.
India,
you know,
when they
it's
say
just,
one,
I'm
it's
coming, I'm
two.
just going to be a few minutes late, but I'm on my way. I know where I have to be there. You know, let me reassure you. So yeah,
How's it in India? Any tricks how it works in India?
show up. I mean, that's it. Just show up.
Just show
you
up.
know, I mean, of course, but actually that trick of on my way is something I even use here, you know, because traffic can be a little bonkers here in Mumbai. One always needs to sort of just kind of let people know that at least you're on the way. I think that's a polite thing to do because you can't always guarantee 100% that you're going to be on time because it's not always in your control. As a matter of fact, the monsoon is leaving us now, and it's leaving us not just in terms of the fact that the rains are stopping, thunder and lightning, but also the roads, you know, there's a lot of potholes everywhere. So, you know, even like, because I have a bike, you know, we've talked about that. Like, you know, when I'm going up and down the road, I gotta have to do some of these and some of these and some of these, some of those.
That is called
you know, and you
filtering.
can't always guarantee that you're going to be on time because you're not really in control of how well paved the road might be or it might not be.
Is there anything that as a Westerner, as an American, you can't do in India? Or, I don't know, some maybe social circles that you never would join being a foreigner
I
or
don't
being an
think so.
immigrant in this country?
India's social hierarchy is very complicated and can be at times very rigid for people in that hierarchy, meaning the socioeconomic hierarchy. And of course, unfortunately, we still have a caste hierarchy here in India. And it can be very, very complicated and a very delicate matter for people to deal with. But as a expat or immigrant foreigner, I don't have to deal with that because I'm out of the system. I'm not part of the hierarchy. I'm a foreign element. So people from all walks of life, from those who you would consider at sort of the elite levels down to the more, you know, lower levels, everyone's very welcoming and very, very loving and very open-minded. So there is
One thing
a
that
sort
you'll
of
see in India
open
always.
invitation when it comes to the social hierarchy. in that regard. But there is also a degree of, I wouldn't say it's closed off. Indians don't assume that you know anything about their culture or their country because they're so used to people being ignorant of it in a way
And we
that
love to
is
tell them about
diminishing and
ours.
demeaning.
The culture.
And they're always very pleasantly surprised and extremely welcoming of those who have learned about it. So at first, people could be a little, when it comes to certain topics, be a little standoffish. But the minute they know that you have taken out the time to get to know their culture and appreciate their culture and even maybe celebrate their culture, they love that. They absolutely love that. They're extremely welcoming. So it's kind of a complicated thing because at times you're in and other times you're kind of out, and it's something you kind of have to learn how to judge. But I don't think any culture in the world is necessarily terribly different because, look, I mean, cultures are something that people will hold very dearly because they help define who they are in a very
India,
essential way.
very dearly.
Last time you recommended the set of films, the movies.
Oh, sure.
That
Yeah,
people
sure.
can watch to have a taste of what real Indian cinema is. Can you recommend a book, something that's maybe not so complicated, something entry-level book for people, for foreigners who want to, maybe that can spark the interest about India and explain like few things about the country?
Luckily, there is an unbelievable amount of books one can read about India, and some of them are absolutely brilliant. There are two books about Mumbai that were written relatively close to each other. One of them is called Shantaram, which actually went on to become an Apple Plus TV show, and the other one is called Maximum City. Of the two, I have to say I'm a little bit more a fan of Maximum City. I think Maximum City is a much more honest lens of Mumbai at that time in the early thousands. Gary David Roberts' Shantaram,
I have
I
not read
feel
both of them.
is not great. I didn't enjoy the book at all, actually. I didn't like it even one bit. I know a lot of people
Then
love
why
it, but I just felt
recommend
it was I just didn't connect with it. Maximum City I quite liked, and I felt it was very real. Mumbai, the city, has changed an enormous amount since Maximum City. Sakutu Mehta wrote that book. It's changed a huge amount since then, but nonetheless, I think that some of the things that you kind of get a flavor
to
for in the book
understand
are
what
still kind
Mumbai
of
is.
true here. So that's a book I would say check out, Maximum City. It's a great book. But I mean, look, the first book I ever read about India was Gandhi's book, My Experiments with Truth. And again, it's really interesting because that book feels very antiquated, or it doesn't really apply to certainly modern metropolitan tier 1, fast-moving, expensive India. But, at the same time, there's an India in the village, right? There are the village Indians, and
might
there
be
are
having those
agricultural
same things now
Indians,
also.
and so many of the people in this country still live that way, the vast majority actually. And those values and ideals are actually not that antiquated. They still sort of do exist on that level. Certainly things have evolved, no doubt, that goes without saying. A lot of the things that was set up in the Gandhian philosophy still kind of remain true in other parts of the country. And that's, of course, a very divisive statement because
Non-violence and
a lot of people, Gandhi's legacy is something that's debated a great deal, and his economic and political thinking is something that a lot of people have a lot of opinions about. I would just say that, I think that it depends on what lens you want to see the country through.
You do a lot of like directing, acting, and like you actually teach people how to do acting, yeah?
Oh.
And like professionals and non-professionals. Is the thing as Indian acting exists, or acting is pretty universal?
There is no such thing as Indian acting or Russian acting or American acting. Acting is acting. And I guess the way I teach acting, or the way we approach acting with the method that we use here, which we lovingly call the Goldberg method.
This was a very good insight about India because this guy has been living in Mumbai for about 10 years or so he can give a good review about India. And yes, people have a lot of bad narrative, and recently we have seen that how people are saying that so many bad things about India, but I think so they have to come to India and to understand India. And in India also there are so many cultures, like in South India there is completely different, in Western India different, in North India very different. So you get different cultures, and also you understand a lot about like how we work and how we do. And also the same thing about the hygiene or the flavors, everything. It is not the same everywhere. One or two might be wrong, or there are some places that might not be right, and even we Indians don't prefer to go there, but mostly is very good.
What I really like about this guy he said wherever you go, you have to be open-minded with wherever you are going, and because you have to explore without any judgments. You need to, you have to be like that sponge to soak in. Like if we are visiting to the US someday, and we might think, oh, people are like not that welcoming, and they are kind of very private thing, because we live in like, we have that so much love, and this thing we call it bhaichara. So we have so much bhaichara here. So we might find in US, oh, people are like so kind of introverts, and they are not paying the proper attention. It's about the country, it's about the culture, it's about the things, but you have to be like still, and just accept the things and enjoy the moment.
Actually, so what do you guys think about it? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share, and
Subscribe.
bye.